Hey guys, my name is Nye Halupka, and today I'm going to be talking to y'all about pyrrhic herbivory, or also commonly known in the industry as patchburn grazing. So, getting kicked off with what patchburn grazing actually is. So, patchburn grazing is when we purposefully burn a section of our pasture, whether it be a third or a sixth of it, depending on what kind of system you're going to run. And we do this prescribed burning for the exact same reason we would in a forestry scenario or a wildlife scenario, where we're trying to get rid of all that accumulated dead and dry vegetation there, because this will help us end up having a more biodiverse system there, because we're getting rid of all that dead vegetation, which is allowing new vegetation to take its place and grow. And when we do these burns, we're also putting nutrients back into the ground, which is going to really help all those new forages actually thrive and come up as a better stand than it was before. And then we also do these prescribed burns as well, because it helps us mitigate some of that wildfire risk. And although that's not as big a concern here in the Southeast as it is out west, in states like Nebraska, Kansas, and Colorado, it's certainly still an occurrence here. And that dead and dry vegetation ends up just being rocket fuel for that fire. And by getting rid of it, we're actually able to slow down that burn. Just the same way as thinking about trying to light a freshly cut piece of wood from a live tree. It's not really going to want to burn, but if you let that wood sit for, a year under a shed and dry out, it's going to light up pretty quickly. So it's that same concept here, just with our pastures and the grasses on them versus a forage, or versus a forest. I'm sorry. So getting into how it works, it's pretty simple how this actually works. And there are some benefits to it versus just a traditional rotational grazing system. That first benefit's going to be lower input costs, because in a patch burn grazing system, you don't need to spend that extra money on stuff like polywire or other forms of fencing to divide up your cattle and get them to only graze one part of your pasture. Because when we actually burn that forage, cattle actually really like it. And it's similar to the reason bison would graze areas that were freshly burned, hundreds of years ago, is it's super palatable to them and it's really nutrient dense. And those are both really two good things that we want to see out of our forages that we're feeding. So getting into the nitty gritty of how it works though. So if we refer to the bottom two pictures here, this would be a once a year burn system. So we'd start out by burning this section here in the green in year one, and those cattle are going to spend roughly 75% of their time there, according to some studies done out of Oklahoma and Tennessee. They'll spend about 75% of their time here in this freshly burned area. And in that time, they'll be eating all that forage, all that fresh burned grass, and they'll also be leaving behind, feces that is eventually going to become fertilizer for the ground and provide even more nutrients for it. And then in year two, what we'll do is we'll burn that next third of the pasture here. And what this allows is last year's section that we burned to have a period of rest to be able to regrow. Well, cattle spend all their time here in this next section. And then in year three, we'll move over to this last final part that we haven't burned yet. So we'll burn it. Cattle are going to move there on their own. And then that will allow our year one and then now our year two sections of that pasture to enter a period of rest and be able to regrow. And then we'll start all over again in year three by going back to year four by going back to where we were in year one here. And then our second kind of system that we commonly see in patch burn grazing is when we do a twice a year burn. So it's the same principle as just doing a once a year burn, but you actually get some additive benefits, because you're really condensing that area where those cattle are grazing at, and really leaving behind more feces and whatnot to provide nutrients to that soil. So we'll start off by doing a dormant season burn in year one. So up here at patch A in that top left corner, start by doing a dormant season burn. And then halfway through the year, whenever it's the growing season, we'll do another burn in patch B here. So in year one, we'll have graze patch A for 6 months, patch B for 6 months. And then in year two, we'll simply move over to patch C and start that process over again, doing that dormant season burn and then doing a growing season burn. And then so on and so forth with patches E and F. And then we'll just repeat the cycle there. And each one of these patches will have had 3 years of rest by the time they see cattle grazing on them again. So why would someone want to actually do this though? So we had talked a little bit about it in that last slide of cattle really like to graze that freshly burned ground and pasture there, just like the bison did hundreds of years ago. So we increase the biodiversity of our pastures there. So we're able to increase the diversity of all the native forages that we have in our pastures. Just the same way it works whenever we do a prescribed burn in a forest area, because we're getting rid of all that dead vegetation there and allowing new stuff to come up and really thrive. And then we also improve our forage quality here. So this is because if we think back to, junior high, 7th grade or whatnot, where they're teaching us about how matter can't be created nor destroyed. So whenever we burn this grass, let's say we have a foot long blade of grass here, and we burn that blade of grass, those nutrients don't just vanish into the air and disappear. They actually end up condensing down and starting to head towards the roots in that bottom couple inches that we still have of that grass there. So all those nutrients in that foot long blade of grass now get condensed into a couple inches there. And that makes that forage quality that much higher, because now cattle are having to, graze that couple inches of grass versus, that foot of grass before. And whenever we burn grass, it actually ends up becoming more palatable. So these cattle are able to eat it and eat it a lot easier. And having that higher forage quality at the same time are two benefits that really are beneficial. And this actually allows us as well to reduce the amount of winter supplementation that we have to give. There was an economic study done by, I believe, a group in Tennessee that found that you actually save $20 a head in hay per year by incorporating a patch burn grazing system, because you're able to extend your grazing season and not have to supplement them as much. So if you're saving $20 a head and you're running 100 head, that's $2,000 a year. And although there are some years where that $2,000 is just nice extra money, that can make the difference some years of between making a profit and being in the red. And then lastly, it reduces overgrazing. So just the same way a rotational grazing system would with, when we have our polywire and we're manually pushing these cattle into new paddocks, we're allowing periods of rest in all those other sections of the pasture, which allows them to regrow and really thrive there for the next time we end up grazing that paddock again. So just a quick summary of everything we went over. So patch burn grazing is mimicking how the bison used to graze way back when. And when we think of that, I know whenever I think of that, I think of, out west of the prairies and how the bison, used to roam out there. But believe it or not, there actually used to be and still are prairies here in the southeast. And there used to be bison that used to roam out here as well. So this is nothing new of a system to incorporate into the landscape if it's been done for hundreds of years before. And this ends up helping us decrease that biodiversity again, like we said, by getting rid of that dead vegetation there and allowing new ones to take its place. And then lastly, we decrease the risk for wildfires. And although this isn't as big of a benefit necessarily here in the southeast, where we don't necessarily think of wildfires occurring like they do out west, where it's a yearly occurrence and more of a when rather than if it happens question, we still do have the possibility for forest fires and wildfires here. Though just this last fall, there was some up in North Carolina and South Carolina, which I'm sure y'all had heard about at some point or another. So by doing stuff like patch burn grazing and these prescribed burns, we're really decreasing the risk for that, because we're getting rid of all that dead vegetation there that's just essentially rocket fuel for those fires. So that's all I have for y'all today. Please feel free to reach out with me at any questions you may have at that email on the slide there. And then here's a quick look at my works cited page in case y'all want any more supplemental information or want to explore this topic any farther. I appreciate y'all listening to this today, and I hope y'all have a good rest of your day.